The following LinkedIn live stream was pre-recorded and produced by 911 Inform and is being rebroadcast on Fletch.tv. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our LinkedIn livecast on AI, the intersection of artificial intelligence and public safety. Thank you all for joining us today. We've put together a superstar cast of individuals involved in public safety, AI, from the legal aspect. I don't do anything without Martha Beyer, just because that's the way it's done. And let's go around the horn here and let folks introduce themselves. I'm going to start off with myself. I'm Mark Fletcher. I'm Vice President of Public Safety Solutions at 911 Inform. And my co-wrangler and co-host is an old friend from Nortel days and Avaya, Matt Conweiser. Matt, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Mark. Hi, everybody. Matt Conweiser here. I am currently a cross-brand technical leader for IBM. And I will put on the standard disclaimer, especially since Martha's here, that while I work for IBM, all thoughts and opinions expressed in this podcast are mine and mine alone. I do not represent the views of my company during this period, but I am a huge AI enthusiast, big on telephony communications, and I've done a lot of work in healthcare and life sciences over the years as well. So this is something that's very important to me. So thank you, Mark, for hosting and having me.
No problem. And legally speaking, my cohort and legal mentor who helped me with Carrie's Law when we first got that initiative rolling, and somebody that I always rely on. And you're not allowed to say it depends today.
Okay.
This is my webinar. Go ahead, Martha Beyer.
I'm Martha Beyer. I'm an attorney whose work is focused primarily in the communications technology space, and I have, because of my long working relationship with Fletch, I've gotten very involved in 911 policy. Spent a lot of time this week doing continuing legal ed on different elements of 911. As we proceed through the webinar, you may hear me refer to myself as the Eeyore of the group, because while I have great respect for the capabilities of AI, I remain concerned.
And for everybody in public safety out there, Ms. Beyer is currently finalizing her study for 3 very important letters that will be after her name. And those letters are, Martha?
ENP.
Very good. Congratulations. We're looking forward to seeing you in the fold. Consulting is very important. Mission critical partners is probably one of the premier folks out there in public safety. And we've got David Frisch, who is their lead AI consultant. David.
Morning. Thank you, Mark, for the opportunity. Yeah, as you mentioned, Mission Critical Partners focuses on the public safety sector and providing services to our clients. I just recently took on the AI role, been a consultant here for a few years. For NASA, I've worked with Microsoft, Boeing, Intel, most of the major companies over the years. I'm a technologist by background and a business owner, and excited to be here to share what's coming and where we are with AI.
So we've got a rocket scientist joining us today.
That's what they say. I've had some fun at NASA. That was a good job.
Yeah, no, that's great. And somebody who's been playing around with AI from a training and development role for a long, long time. Cordy is a company that I ran into probably 10 years ago down at Nashville at NINA, and I was incredibly impressed with what they accomplished way back then. Florian Schwieker, I hope I said that right, is their global partnership officer. Welcome to the webinar today and telling us what Cordy has to bring to the table.
Yes, thank you very much, Mark, and thanks for the invite. Great to be here. Yeah, AI 10 years ago in medical, nobody knew what that was. So you're one of the very first people who got contact with that. Corty is a medical AI company that started as a research company because the idea was to augment every patient interaction. And that starts actually with 911 calls, of course, if somebody calls. And we wanted to help the professionals on the phone and then later in the hospitals and the GPs to get an additional set of ears, if you will, that helps them try to come to the right conclusion faster and with a higher precision. And Martha, a fun fact, I am also by training a lawyer. So I used to work as a lawyer for 10 years, but in a different field because I was a defendant lawyer. Therefore, also the slight connection to 911.
Well, no, that's fantastic. So when Matt and I had our podcast, one of the things that we discussed, and one of my concerns, where does the large language model come from that people use? It's the first question I ask people when they have a solution. I mean, who does your LLM? Is it yours? Are you using ChatGPT? So, Matt, tell us about the LLM models that are out there and kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yeah. So, I mean, we've got Florian and Dave here, and what you will find, as I'm sure will happen on this call as well, there's no shortage of opinions, many of them varying on a lot of these topics, because frankly, the field is so new, and the technology and the capabilities are evolving literally daily. Every time there's a new model published that's open source, there are 1,500 variants of it available within 24 hours. That's just the way it works. But the way this started, Dave and Florian, just to give you some additional background, was I wrote a post on LinkedIn and I tagged Mark and I said, you know, when you call a phone number, whether it's a medical care provider or an insurance company or a hospital, the very first thing you hear is, if this is an emergency, hang up and call 911. But a lot of these companies, a lot of these businesses are now putting chatbots as the front end to patients. And the chatbots do not immediately say, if this isn't a medical emergency, hang up and call 911. So I started wondering, well, you know, can an AI has sentiment analysis and emotional detection. What if it detects stress or pain or something else as somebody's typing or trying to speak to it? Is there a responsibility on the part of the company hosting that model to call 911 on behalf of the person that's now interacting with the chatbot? Can we trust the chatbot to be that middle person? And that's how we ended up in this whole conversation and onward. So Mark, to the question about large language models, large language models are a form of AI, right? A lot of people kind of use AI and generative AI synonymously, and that's absolutely false. And I'm not going to get into that on this meeting, but generative AI is what large language models are a portion of. And effectively what it allows these AI things to do, for lack of a more technical term for right now, is interact with humans in natural language and learn on their own, process information, and come up with responses based on what people are asking and what it's learned on its own with very little human interaction. It can be very helpful, or if it's done wrong, it can end up very badly. And but if we don't worry about the bad side and we talk about the upside, the benefit is that it can provide instant response to humans who have questions, who need things answered. And that's kind of a great tie-in to this whole topic today. So whether you choose to use your own model and build it and train it yourself, or whether you use a public one, that's probably more a question for Martha, because there's a lot of different risk and liability associated with those choices. And the most important thing that I think that businesses and companies and emergency caregivers need to be aware of is what those risks are, how to identify them, how to mitigate them, how to fix them, and who's responsible if they exist and if they present themselves in a way that causes harm. So that's kind of what I'll leave you with as kind of an opener here, but I'm sure that Florian or Dave might have additional things to say there.
Yeah, in fact, I'm super glad you open it up like that, Matt, because from the get-go, I think people are concerned, and I can just speak for myself, if I have an important decision to put that in the hands of a robot, what we sometimes hear from people. So you want to make sure that that information is handled well. And to look at Martha as our legal expert here, that is concerning the privacy and the regulations, and that my private and patient data is taken care of in the right way, as well as what the large language models, as you explained beautifully, suggest that somebody should be doing, is something relevant that helps and is not something that hallucinates. And that is exactly the reason why I think it's important to validate that both on the privacy side. And that's one of the nice things why I was happy to join Corti, coming from a very large company like Philips, because it has been literally, I would say, built and pressure tested in two regions. Corti was forged in the fires of GDPR. For those who don't know what that is European data regulations. And I tell you, we can be very regulative on data because Corti, although we have offices in New York and the majority of our customers are in the US, that was the first thing to go through. And the second thing is that we have been starting in the emergency medical space, where you have people that are very agitated when they call, that are in shock. You have a very, very bad sound quality, and those language models needs to understand that. So we said, well, we're a research company originally. Let's peer review everything that we do and make sure that others have a critical eye that are outside of Corti and validate that. And on the other side, make sure that we constantly test the data that we put to train the LLM. Because you can train it with true data, like 2 + 2 is 4. That's a fact. You can train it with data where you know it's wrong. 2 + 2 is 5 is wrong. And if you train it that way, it really becomes smart and can handle information that it hasn't known before. And that's the nice thing actually about the 911 space, because to train an LLM, you first have the audio of the call taker and the caller. Then you have the data of the ambulance that says, well, we know what they talked about, but then the paramedics on the scene might get additional information that they label to the data. Then you have the emergency room, and later maybe a GP or a therapist or a nurse. And our AI has been trained with more than 100 million data sets of real patient interactions to really make it smart in that field. And the other thing is, quite frankly, it learns over time. And we've been out in the field for 8 years now, which is relatively long for an AI company in the medical space. And we'd rather let our customers like Seattle Fire or Boston Fire or 40 others and GMR speak to what they don't like, but what they like and appreciate and where it can help. So you're right. The AI needs to be an LLM that's trained on medical if you want to use it in medical. Plus, looking at Martha, you need to take really care of the patient data, that it stays secure and compliant.
You know, and we'll get to Martha a second on the legality side of that, but I want to hear from David. What do you find that customers are looking to implement in the public safety space? What problem are they trying to solve?
Yeah, I think on the customer side, and by the way, I just wanted to add on the LLM side, I completely agree. I'm at a trade show today. The first things I ask the vendors is, what model are you using? What subscription model are you in? And I love that we're focusing somewhat on Mark, kind of the star of the show. We haven't spoken yet because you're focusing on how does that impact our customers, right? And so that's one of the things that customers are focusing on is the legal aspect of this, and that I have a zero tolerance policy, right, for the public. We can't get this wrong. Medical, law enforcement, et cetera, fire, et cetera. We can't get this wrong. So there's zero tolerance, and AI is not always going to get things right. And so we have to be very careful. And the best way to mitigate that now is obviously, and I'm, this is not my knowledge, but human in the AI advice. But we need to make sure that people are making those decisions, because there's a chance that it gets things wrong. But really, a lot of what they're looking for now is, what can I do? And it's not that there's a lot of vendors out there. There's a lot of things, and I would love to share some of those use cases. But there's a lot of fear of just not getting it right. There's a lot, and so we're essentially making sure that they are having some governance in place and making sure that they are able to make decisions and that are going to be policy based and not violate the public trust, because and involve legal, because again, we can't go wrong, and that's so important. So what are they looking to do? The low-hanging fruit is really the obvious thing, and your 911's in the title of your company name, Mark. It is the customer service side of this thing. It is the non-emergency calls. There's companies sprouting up all over the place that are saying, hey, use my model, and we want to dive into what that is, but because it will at least triage the calls. Right now in public safety, 911 calls, as many as 40% of the calls that are taken are non-emergency, right? And handled by the same people, the priority, but if we can triage those calls, and so that's one of the big things that a lot of companies are offering is, non-emergency call center things. The other is, which I'm kind of excited about, is simple things like that in any office, there are business processes, there are writing of reports, there is the analyzing the data, the summarizing the data. It's just the rote things that cops and public safety and nobody likes to do that AI is actually pretty dang good at. As long as you review what it did, you can actually, and there's a company here, there's in our conference that, does like they take the video, the body cams, right? And if the officer has just asked the right questions, it'll take that body cam footage and it'll generate a report on body cams. Well, that's pretty cool. As long, again, as they're reviewing that it's accurate and checking things like that. If it can save an officer, several hours a day, that's great. That's more time he or she can be on the streets doing what they love to do, which is, interacting with the public and things like that. So I don't want to take all my Mark, probably talk for an hour and stuff. There's a lot of use cases, but we have to make sure that people are comfortable and understand, what they can and can't do. And that involves Martha's job again.
Yeah, and Martha, I'm very interested. Now, remember the rule: you're not allowed to say it depends. But let me ask you: at some point, right? Everyone is involved in AI is using a large language model, regardless of where that's from. So let's say an incident happens and something bad happens. Who's at fault? Is it the large language model producer? The LLM user? I mean, is there any case law? Obviously not AI yet. It's too early. But, in other software applications, where does that liability fall?
Well, I would say this.
You can say it depends.
No, I'm not going to. General legal practices, when there's an issue, when there's a tort, you essentially throw the spaghetti against the wall and see what sticks. Right? You sue everybody in the process. And so part of the responsibility of everyone involved in that chain is making sure that the agreements that they have between and amongst themselves protect them to the extent that's possible, given the circumstances. There's one really huge point that I wanted to make, and that is, and I did say this before, it makes me sort of the Eeyore of the group, but let's say that the AI, and I hate to use the word solution, but the AI product produces a good result 80% of the time. And maybe it does. So first of all, what happens to the people who are in the 20% group? Are they denied access? That's one issue. The second is, it's important to remember that humans by themselves make mistakes too. So AI isn't necessarily the bad guy or any worse of a guy than a human making that decision. But the third issue, I think, really goes to what Florian mentioned, which is both GDPR compliance and compliance with the new EU AI Act, which is a much bigger standard. In the U.S., privacy regulations are done by state, and not every state has them. So how these rules will be applied from state to state is very different. The technology is new enough that there hasn't really been any litigation that I'm aware of yet, but it's coming. It's coming. So my primary concern is always about the people who are not served by the AI, whether it's an LLM model or not, which would be redundant, right? Large language model. Anyway.
If I could add something to that, Martha, because it's a huge concern of mine, is there's two camps in the technology world right now and one of them is really, I would call the Section 230 protection side of this thing, where here's the tool at your own risk. and we're absolved as a company of liability, right? And that has fueled the internet, really, because we wouldn't have any of our tools really that are out there because of the liability that does come when there are mistakes made. Then there's another camp that actually is getting fairly vocal right in the technology community, and that's almost the abolished Section 230, and you are totally responsible for everything that comes out of it. The concern there is we won't have innovation at that point. If Tesla is responsible for everything a driver does when they're using full self-driving, there won't be full self-driving, right? There's too much liability there. So it's this big divide in technology as to where we're going. Right now, we're still on Section 230 side, which is almost, here's my warning label, use it at your own risk. That may be too blank of absolving people and companies of their responsibility to do things and protect people. So it's an interesting legal battle that we're in.
So Dave, I'm glad you brought that up, because I didn't know about Section 230, right? I'm not nearly as experienced in the emergency services and responders area. But I was going to ask Martha a question, and it might relate directly to that. And that is, one of the things that we have to worry about with AI is like transcription services and, bots that listen into conferences and wiretapping laws, right? So if it's a two-party consent state, or you're doing international, that's a major, major problem. If somebody calls 911 and there's an AI agent listening in for translation services or transcription or for more advanced routing, does the person who dialed 911 have to first give consent for that use? Or is there like a Good Samaritan type law that says because they're calling an emergency service, all bets are off and they can do whatever they need to get the care? I mean, how does that apply to an AI model?
So it's a great question. And the answer is, I don't know. But it's a really important question to ask. And another question that sort of feeds on this is, as you are securing services that are AI driven, how are you going to know when the company that manufactured it or created it, the entity that created it, upgrades? Will you automatically be upgraded to not necessarily? So that's where contracts become so incredibly important. And the short answer of who's liable is everyone in the chain. Everyone in the chain. And so that's why it requires really extra vigilance from everyone.
Yeah, I like that a lot, because that's super important. Because when you mentioned, Matt, in the beginning, there are bots who take care of lower or mid acuity situations. One of the fundamental principles of our organization at Corti is to provide suggestions and additional information to the humans that they can make more educated decisions. So the AI, in my mind, should not make a decision. It should be an extra set of ears that listens in. For example, we have done probably the largest study so far that was published in Nature magazine in December on the recognition of stroke, because stroke in 911 centers across the globe, and also GPs and hospitals, wherever a patient has the first interaction with the medical system, if they have a stroke, only gets detected around 50% of the time. So on 2 million cases, the AI has been joining those interactions. And we found out that the Corti models identified stroke in 20% cases more and faster than humans. And it can provide help by saying, hey, you might not have picked up on that symptom. Ask that additional question, to validate if there is a case of urgency. That can be chest pain where you want to identify a stroke, a cardiac arrest, or something else. It can be any severity, or which basically Seattle Fire is using with the Corti solution. I think, David, you or Matt mentioned that 30 to 50% of the cases that call medical 911 are low to mid acuity. So that's a huge problem, because they might dispatch an ambulance where it's not needed. So they might even pick them up and drive them to the ER just for the ER doctor to release them and say, please see your GP or a nurse. It's not urgent. But the problem is that the ambulance is blocked for an urgent case. We have, besides the waste of money, obviously, that then the taxpayer has to pay, also the ER are blocked, who sometimes have hours of people waiting in line in order to get support. And if you can filter those out by providing a suggestion to the 911 call taker. Hey, that might be a low acuity case. Ask those 2-3 questions and then hand it over to a nurse line. Yeah, that you got the relevant people on the call, but leave the decision to the human. I think then AI can be really powerful. So I see it as a tool, like back in the day, an X-ray would help people where they can look into the chest of people and see if there's something going on. AI should be a supportive tool to humans that provides an extra set of ears and suggests with additional expertise. And then, Martha, also, if we leave the humans making the decisions, probably in a more, I would say, usable way. You can use AI. It should not replace. I think it should support.
I think AI, by having the name artificial intelligence and the assumption that it's this robot Terminator, I'm going to take over the world, has really given itself a bad name. Nobody criticizes anybody for Googling something. Gee, I'm having chest pains. Put that into Google. Is anybody going to criticize you for that? Probably not. AI is just, for lack of a better term, Google on steroids that's voice activated or initiated. And I think I like to refer to it as assistive intelligence, because it's nothing more than, heck, when Matt and I were chatting the other day, not even doing the webinar, but we were just chatting. I mentioned Cordy. He popped Cordy into his AI model and came back with, oh, these are the guys that did this. Yeah, that's the guys. So AI, to me, AI is the more intelligent model for Googling something. And I'm quite surprised that Google isn't bought into that yet, or it doesn't seem like it has.
Well,
why hasn't it?
So let me tell you why I don't like that comment. Why I don't agree. First of all, I'll tell you as an interesting anecdote. A couple months ago, I was having brunch with some friends, and they had invited some older neighbors over. And the older neighbor was asking me what I thought of that new service, A1. Not making this up. Really wondered about A1. But there's certain things that are definite, and that is the amount of time that a first responder has to get to someone. And so, again, if 80% of the cases that rely on AI in some portion of the process are effective, that's great. But for the 20% where the AI model fails for any number of reasons, the person can't understand what's being said, they can't hear, whatever it is, the jumps from position one to the second tier, the nurse, for example, that Florian mentioned, all that stuff adds time, and that delays the first responder to getting someone. So I'm not saying AI is a bad thing. I'm saying the opposite, but must be used with great care and oversight, because there's a set time limit, and anything that gets in the way of that, to me, is troublesome.
So I agree with you on probably 99% of the words that come out of your mouth. But this is one where I kind of disagree, because you're saying if I can't serve 100%, then everybody should be penalized because I can't service the 20, let alone I could service the 80 much better.
Well, so
all
Mark,
I'm saying is, if you're in the 20, the whoever the overall system administrator is needs to be aware that the 20 is out there.
Okay.
That's all I'm saying. AI can be an incredibly helpful tool, but there are people who are left out of it for any number of reasons, and the administrator, the entity that's running the process, has to be aware that it may not work for everyone.
Sure, there are people without smartphones too. Matt, you had a comment.
Yeah, so first of all, Mark, the Google on steroids comment, I'm going to steal this line from Star Wars: A New Hope, so I hope George Lucas isn't watching this. But as you said that, thousands of AI research voices cried out at once in pain and then were suddenly silenced. Generative models are not Google on steroids at all, but I can understand from a perception and flow perspective how it could be seen that way. So I just wanted to throw that out there. The other thing is, I think it's a pain tolerance issue with the 80-20, right? Now, I don't know if it's 80-20 or not. First of all, there are techniques to train and tune these models that are creating higher and higher and higher degrees of accuracy. I just read an article in actually the latest Harvard Business Review that said there's a methodology called minor to major that improved accuracy from 16% to 99% in generative or large language models, just by asking the model to kind of think of it like you would a child, to step through a problem instead of just ask it to solve the problem. But I think that there's a perception issue, right? Humans are fallible, we make mistakes, and we accept that because we're quote unquote only human. And I think that there's a higher bar to be set by machines. I think there's an expectation that if it's an AI or if it's a machine, it should be right. It's expected to be right. Why wouldn't it be? Except for the fact that people forget that it's trained on human data and operated by humans. So if humans aren't perfect, the AI really can't be. And it will make mistakes. But one of the things we talked about, Mark, before was overflow. So if you call 911 during a critical situation, like unfortunately what's happened in Florida, and the phone lines are down, or all of the 911 operators are unavailable, and there is an AI spillover that's sitting there, would you rather 8 out of those 10 people that can't reach a live operator speak to an AI that can at least get routed, marked, and handled? Or would you want none of them to do that? And that's, we have to kind of start to look at, human good versus perfection. And the 2 out of the 10 might not get served, or they may end up in harm, but there's 8 people that would normally not have gotten any care that is now getting care. And I don't know how to solve that equation. I just wanted to throw that out there, that it's important that we start to think about things like that as well. And that we keep focusing on the 20, and we have to also think about the 80.
Yeah, I think that's such an important reason, because not only do we have that in Florida, if incidents like that hit out of the blue, more or less, so you have a 1 or 2 day warning, but also during COVID, we saw that. If you recall the emergency rooms, there were sometimes lines of ambulances standing there for 2, 3, 4 hours. In the UK, even up to 12 hours. And if an AI assistant can help to progress that and go faster, and also maybe identify the priorities. There's one project, for example, that we did with the Scottish Ambulance Service, where they said they had such an overflow on calls, they immediately color-coded them. There we need an ambulance and a doctor, there we need ambulance and paramedics, and those people can be called back. So they had a callback queue. But the problem was in the queue, people deteriorated, so cases deteriorated. So our task was to have a constant look at everybody who's in the callback queue, and not like they did before, first in, first out, that you're waiting for 4 hours, because it's a 4-hour queue if you call in right now, that we constantly supervise the severity, put the highest severity on top. So you might call in, and the 9-hour queue, you get a call back in 5 minutes, and also look at the cases who deteriorate fastest. So you can't make 100% correct. I completely am with you, Martha. But if in a queue where there's 2,000 people, you can stack 80% correctly, that the high severity gets called back faster, you literally have the opportunity to save lives. It's hard now because you can't save everybody. But if you say you can help everybody better than without it, I think it's definitely a good case talking to. And the other one that came to my mind, basically, Mark, when you said that, is I had and that's one of the pleasant cases. I had an emergency room doctor calling in today, and he said, you know what, we have a lot of not medically trained nurses like a doctor is, who also triage if we have an overflow. And there's one thing where your system constantly helps, because meningitis in an early case gets often misdiagnosed as a neck pain. And if you listen in and you tell the nurse, ask those 2 simple questions, like bend your head forward, can you do it, how far can you do it or not? And he said, today again, we identified 2 meningitis cases that probably would have slipped. We probably missed one or two others, but for those who we found it, I think this is where it's relevant.
So Erica Lakey has asked or has said Google Gemini. Now I know Erica, she's a very inquisitive person. I've never heard of Google Gemini. What is it?
Google Gemini
Gemini
is
is
a
their
competitor to GPT or Claude or any of the others. It's a public large language model, but it is Google's service. And by the way, if you Google something now, you will see the first bar is actually an AI processed response in natural language to your query, and then the rest of it is your standard search engine results. So Mark, she's absolutely correct. Google has already embedded natural language and large language models into their search engines.
So here's a question. If AI actually led to slower response times, how long would it take for the industry to notice? Are researchers, for example, academia, even able to get the data to answer this question? This person doesn't think anything should be deployed into production unless we already built the necessary monitoring tools to evaluate the impact for good or bad. That's a pretty interesting point.
Yeah, I'm glad that that topic is brought up, because funny enough, when I said Corti started as a research company, we first looked at things. So we created a tool in the very beginning called Mission Control. And what it does is analyze 100% of all the calls and quality assure. You know, in the 911 centers, there's different methodologies that they use, but the majority of them have some kind of protocol that they triage the patients through. So you ask the question, and based on the answer, that leads you to the next question. And there's two things that you need to look at. The one is, are they asking and following the right protocol? So you can see how good do they actually do. And the second thing is you see also, okay, how accurate were they on the outcome? Because you can, again, get that then from the ambulance data. So you have the CAT systems that get all the data feed inside where you know, okay, how right were they or how wrong were they? So what I like that question, because that's exactly it. You don't want to put a tool in place that makes it worse. You first want to analyze how's the situation and then how does it change? And only if you see the use of AI improves accuracy and speed, then you want to use it. And that is one of the reasons, because you don't know what you don't know, right? While we do completely free of charge proof of value solutions where we monitor exactly that. Let's see what's the status quo. Let's see what you expect. And if you don't get that through a proof of value phase, then simply don't use it. Yeah, because you're right. You don't want to have a tool that slows you down just because it's fancy. You want to have a tool that improves speed and accuracy. And that's why we actually do all those proof of value phases, because any 911 center should really put it to production.
Yeah.
Very good question.
A couple more questions. So this one is for one of you specifically, from Darren Riley. Great podcast. So good job, David. Your boss likes it. The next question, actually, there we go. From Thomas, voice recognition models are not perfect enough yet. Have you seen how many times the assistant responds, I do not understand, leading to frustration for the caller who might be injured or in pain?
Absolutely. I mean, it's changing quickly, and I get very frustrated with automatic call handling and chatbots over the years, because they're just, you know, they have Apple Intelligence now, right? The beta version. It is, excuse my language, idiotic. It's not good at all. If Apple releases this to the public, they will fail, because it's horrible. It is, hey, here's the things I want an answer. Here's the good things. But if I use Anthropic's Claude, or if I use OpenAI, and they have voice modules as well, the responses are amazing. My point is that it's changing very, very quickly. Google Gemini is sorry for the caller there. They're behind those models, at least testing, because I regularly test all these things, all the major models anyway. But it's changing so quickly that it is going to be relevant fairly soon. And the I don't understand, you're going to actually get maybe a question to qualify it, but it works really well, especially OpenAI. We're going to have, back to your previous areas, I was muted. I was actually going to respond, and I get my mute button. Is AI assistance, and like you were talking about, Mark, that it's assisted intelligence, if you will, instead of artificial intelligence. That's where we are today, but that's not where we're going. That is something that we should be today, and it's assisting humans. But realize that this is progressing, so that one of the questions you had on your preface to this was define artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is really pattern recognition. It is something that is simulating human thought and human intelligence. And I look at it this way, if you look at Tesla's self-driving capabilities and where they've been, they did exactly as Florian was describing. They've did a little bit, right? Let me assist them. Keep your hands on the wheel, but you're still going to have assisted driving for a little while, right? And they're still in the mode. But they are gradually working up to the place where they are proving their use cases to say, hey, full self-driving is probably going to be way more safer than humans, but we got to have the data to back that up. Otherwise, we're going to get sued, right? So back to our legal side. But it is progressing where it's no longer at some point in our near future, and this is kind of a 2 to 4 year projection. It's going to be making decisions for us in some instances. Now, that may be, and probably should be, farther behind for public safety, especially for medical, and it should be much more listed. And where clients are today is, what you have to do is just set up these use cases, prove them in a pilot situation that's isolated, so you understand what the impact is, so that you can make those judgment calls to say, hey, I'm going to let AI assist us a little bit more in this realm, a little bit less in this realm, and it's really going to be a matter of testing and proving out those use cases. But my point was, and should add a little bit to this conversation, it's not going to just be assisted. It's going to be gradually giving a little bit more and more control to the AI where we get comfortable with it over the next 3 to 5 years, really short term.
So Erica said, go ahead, Martha. I'm sorry.
I want to jump in on 2 points. First, hi, Erica, and I want to answer your question, sort of, which is who decides how the priorities are determined to prioritize those calls? And this actually ties into what Matt was saying earlier about recognizing emotional, the emotional quality or quantity within a given call. Who makes those decisions? And are the people who are at the table when those decisions are made representing a diverse group of potential users? These are subtleties. They're a little touchy-feely for a lot of people, but the fact is they remain critically important. Who makes the decision about what's a top priority? Obviously, a car crash is more of an issue than a kitten stuck in a tree. But in terms of other levels of gray, how do you make those decisions? How do you establish those priorities? And that's something that you must understand before you can jump in.
I have a thought process there, Martha, and this is where it's going to be very slow in government, because it is a huge diverse group. It's going to be these pilots that are going to be saying, hey, here are our results, and we recommended this as an organization, right? Now that's got to boil up to whoever the governing authorities are, the rule makers, it may be policymakers, et cetera, as well. But at some point, it's got up to the lawmakers, it's got up to those who are in the government, and that's got to involve advocacy groups from various other groups that are saying, hey, is this being done fairly? Not only is it a good decision, is it impacting, is there bias that's impacting various different social groups differently than other social groups? Those are critical because higher technologies are shut down because they didn't consider those things. Now, it may be, maybe they have a political agenda, but you got to consider those political agendas, because things will shut down higher projects that, may be well-meaning and maybe have some good social impact, but they impacted a group differently. I look like in LA, there was predictive policing technology that's been out, this is even many years ago, where they were saying, here is a way of making sure your officers are in the right place where we predict crime to be happening. But what's interesting about that, you're saying, hey, that's a really good thing. We should have shorter response times. They should be where the crime is going to be predicted to happen. But what happened is it ended up being self-reinforcing. Because there were police in that area, guess what? They found more crime in that area that fed into the algorithm that we're going to have more police in the area. Oh my gosh. So, that didn't pan out pretty well. And that whole, I looked them up recently, I think the companies involved with that don't exist anymore. And it wasn't that it was not a good plan, but you got to be very careful. So it's going to move slow, and legal and advocacy groups and politicians got to all be involved. Take some time.
One of the guests that I was going to have on here was from GMR, Global Medical Response. Used to be AMR, and once you know the name and you watch, you'll see them all over TV. They've got, I don't know, 20, 30,000 ambulances across the U.S. Dan Cotton, who's their CTO, was going to be on this call and was very interested in hearing his opinion, because he's got this model of pre-staffing areas. Hey, I know that it's raining on a Thursday night. I'm going to statistically have more calls down here on this side of town than I do elsewhere. That's statistical data. That's mathematical. And I'll go back to a comment that Matt and I had on a previous conversation. That's standard if, then, or else technology. I'm not sure that's quite AI, but it certainly leads into AI. So Florian, how do the models take that into consideration? But again, counter that with David's comment. Well, if I've got more people looking for it there, I'm going to find more there. So do you invalidate your own model?
Yeah, you have to. And I'm quite glad that that point of the discussion is brought up. GMR, we're working very closely with them. So they're one of our customers, and we support them on their overall centers. So they have 60 centers that they operate. But they also brought a new, what I think is wonderful part to their business, which is a nurse line that can take the mid and low acuity cases, basically from the 911s, in order to relieve them and really have time for the critical cases and dispatch. Like you say, they have tens of thousands of ambulances and planes. I think they're even the third largest airline in the US, based on the helicopters and planes that they have. And this is where data really becomes relevant, because if you analyze, and that's why what I mentioned earlier, our tool called Mission Control, if you analyze hundreds of millions of calls, you can see patterns. Because AI, like you mentioned, matters. I have information, and then I'm running into a situation that I didn't know. AI makes something up. But the other thing that AI can really do is analyze things and then come to conclusions. So based on the data of years and years of calls and situations and overload, or being able to handle it, that you have, you can make those predictions. So you can actually really deploy the people where they are needed. I want to give you a simple example where this became really critical. Again, with Seattle, because we worked with them they were one of the first Corti customers. When COVID hit the world, we were helping them with a pre-triage app where you as a citizen could, on your smartphone, answer questions like how you're feeling, what you're doing, and then they would direct you what number you should call based on that. So then we could have heat maps of COVID outbreaks, because based on the answers, you would know there's more COVID cases here, because later we had the data. And that allowed us to have a heat map of the city of Seattle and help them to show them where there were outbreaks of COVID, so they could deploy more vaccination teams there, have more doctors and nurses on staff in that part of the city in order to help the people. So what you mentioned with GMR and Dan is to say, we have rain coming up there, or we have flu season or COVID season or whatever. Where do I put my resources? Can very well be done. And you can do it very, very smartly. So this is another field where AI can really help, and where with those heat maps that when we started in Seattle, it was actually deployed over the world, would really help the people on the ground. Because it doesn't help if you build out vaccination centers where there's nobody who wants to be or needs to be vaccinated, and deploy the people in the right place. So this is definitely a field for AI.
So this is what I call the Terminator syndrome. We make AI so intelligent. I see Matt smiling about this already. But, in the future, let's say time travel is possible. AI says, you know what? This planet is about to die. Why is it dying? Because humans have messed it up. We can go back in time and we can fix the problem by getting rid of the humans. And that's the Terminator model, right? So, how do we prevent that? How do we marshal AI so it doesn't get the genie out of the bottle? Matt, I'd like to hear your opinion on that.
I've been taking notes here on my little e-ink thing here, and as you all were talking, I wrote down a word, and I want to show everybody. The answer is governance, right? And I'm even looking at some of the questions that are coming up, and governance is a big topic, right? We could probably, David, Florian, and I could probably spend 3 hours just doing one of these on the topic of AI governance. But in the context of this conversation, I'm going to paint it in two different ways. And the first one is we have to make sure, ultimately, just like the oath, that AI does no harm. Right? It may not do good, but it can't do harm. It can't do worse than somebody already is. Now, how does that happen? There's a lot of different ways it needs to happen. And the first thing is, there was a suggestion about creating a trial period for assistive AI in ECCs. And the answer is yes, absolutely. You want a trial period. And in that trial period, even if a system is capable of being fully autonomous, it shouldn't be. You need to have a human kind of checking every decision and then helping it correct itself if it comes out with the wrong decision. So that is definitely a part of it, right? That's a part of governance. The other part of governance, and this is something that Florian talked about, that Cordy has worked very hard on, and that is making sure that you're putting the right stuff into it. If you put science fiction works that talk about some, like the movie Elysium, where they have pods that fly down and just heal people automatically. If you train a model on that and somebody is presenting with an illness that nobody can diagnose, it'll say, just use a healing pod. Well, those don't exist. But the AI thinks it does because somebody trained it on that movie. So you have to be really careful about that kind of stuff. The other thing that's part of governance under this same realm is the concept of confabulation or hallucination. You can pick your word for it. You don't want it making up a treatment that doesn't exist, or coming up with a treatment that it doesn't apply to the symptoms because it couldn't find the exactly right answer. So it just put something together because that's what it's designed to do. So all of these things can be controlled and worked on by governance. That's one piece of governance. The other piece is ethics. And ethics, as it comes to patient care, human care, is critically important. The problem with ethics is it's really hard to govern. You can't write a law that creates ethics. And I'll give you an example, Mark, to use your Terminator reference. You made me quote Star Wars because of something you said, and now you're quoting a movie and I've got to countermand it. So you're driving me crazy here, bud. But the one I want you to think about as it relates to ethics, there was a study done where they took a model and they trained it on modern military tactics. And they said, somebody's attacking us. What should we do? And it just said, nuke them. Just first step, nuke them. And they asked the model, why? Why would you nuke them? And the model said, well, if the objective is to win and we have nuclear weapons, we'll use them. It's illogical, right? Except it's not very logical for us to have made nuclear weapons in the first place, because why would we want to kill so many people? Why would we want to kill anybody? So ethics is a really hard topic, because you have to program a model for ethics when human history doesn't have much of that. And so we have to figure out, as part of this overall governance of AI, how to teach it to be better than we are. And that's still something I think everybody's trying to figure out, because right now the big emphasis is just building a better model, a faster model, a bigger model, a cooler model. And, I feel like we need to reel it in a little bit and focus on this stuff a little more. So that's my diatribe on this whole topic of how we prevent, Skynet and the 20% becoming the 80% and everything else. So I see Florian very animated here, so I'm sure you have something to say, but that's my 2 cents.
So let me just add before, see if you get this movie reference. To fix this, how about a nice game of tic-tac-toe?
And
It was
they were
chess.
working.
It was chess.
Yeah, war games, absolutely. If I might add something, as a technologist, I've always been of the opinion, oh, this is just technology. We can control it. It's no big deal. But I was challenged on that. There's a gentleman named Jerry Hinton who he received the Nobel Prize last week for his work in AI. He's called the godfather of AI. I was at a conference last month, and he actually explained he's what we call a doomer. That Skynet's coming unless we prevent it. And but I'm like, yeah, right, no big deal, just pass it under. But he explained why. And it is that artificial intelligence, he says, it learns like us. It remembers things like us. He said the hallucinations are because, like our brain, our brain doesn't store things in sequential sequences. It has information, and it, like you have a smell that memories from all over the place that are assembled into something that may or may not be accurate. And sometimes we don't even get it right from our own memories. And he said that's the same thing that happens in a hallucination. It's doing associations that it made that are maybe not accurate. But what he's getting at is that AI at some point will get sophisticated enough that it doesn't need us to think or to reason or to make decisions. And what we allow it to do is very important to get as a foundational basis now. And you're not hurting anything by putting in guardrails and things like that and again, it might be governance, yes, at a company level, but it's going to be laws, it's going to be regulation at a national level. And these things have to be considered internationally because, again, if you set laws that restrict our own development and work on AI and China doesn't or whatever, and then we're losing in terms of our country. So it's a complex issue. But he made me rethink it's just technology, don't worry about it, to, well, we better build our own rules. That Skynet's and War Games, which is one of my favorite movies too from way back when, it doesn't become possible because it can't the nucleus or whatever, right? So that's important.
So here's the thing. Having written legislation that was simple, you got to be able to call 911 from any phone on a multi-line telephone system. The most simplistic law you could come up with took 4.5 years to get through Congress to the president's desk. Yes, we could govern through legislation. Number one, it'll take so long that AI will so pass the requirements of that law. The law will be so weak that it won't do a damn thing. And number three, it won't be enforceable. So it's just a big waste of time.
I disagree.
You're not wrong, Mark.
Respectfully. Oh, David, you go ahead.
No, I was just agreeing with him. You're not wrong, Mark. we're slow in government. There's no doubt.
But I would want to then perfectly let me disagree because the panel's only fun, right? If we have different opinions here. I disagree in a way because we're getting more.
No, you're allowed to be wrong. I have no problem with you being wrong. Go ahead.
You know what? That is such a nice quote. I love to be wrong and be educated by people much smarter than me, and that happens luckily in Corti every day, and with a panel like that as well. But one of the things why I said we were forged in the fires of GDPR is that we, with AI, actually have, I think, a necessity to learn from each other across the globe. And I think it's a very human thing to think AI would do something bad and eliminate the world. I agree with you, Matt. It's about governance. Yeah, I see it as a working tool. And if we task AI with helping us with things that are labor intense, I think, Mark, you were in the beginning saying that medical professionals, I think it was you, David, need to document a lot. Nobody likes to do that. And because we don't like to do that, we're actually very bad at that. Only 1% of medical documentation, no matter if it's 911 in an ambulance, in a GP, in a hospital, is quality assured. And 60%, because Mayo Clinic, fantastic, did studies on that, is wrong. 88% of the second opinion of a doctor on a medical case is different from the first opinion. So we're very good at analyzing stuff and finding out where we have things that we can actually improve. So we should put AI on simple tasks. We don't have to have it change world policy. It won't do that. It won't solve a lot of problems. But if we say, well, medical professionals, 50% of their time is spent on documentation instead on patients. We can let AI take care of documentation. It's actually quite good at that. It can take 80% of the time away. And in a second, we have the medical professionals' time again on the patient, where they can help. That's a simple task for AI. And then Martha and all the legal regulations and the governance that you mentioned can safeguard that the data is handled accurately and that the data is treated in a way that it respects privacy and everybody's personal rights. That's not magic. Their AI can help quite properly. And on the other thing, let's put AI on tasks where we can agree right now and where it can immediately help. It doesn't need to solve, it just needs to assist. It's a tool, it's not a robot. If we put the governments in place, I think it can do magic. And I saw a question on the panel. Is it standard in ECCs that you basically test drive AI before you buy it? I quite frankly don't know what other companies do. I think it has to be, because such a new technology, you need to win the confidence of the people. You need to win the confidence of the people on the floor that take the calls, of the shift leaders that take responsibility. You need to share the data openly with the public. You need to win confidence. Therefore, I definitely say, of course, you need to make it best practice.
No, I agree. I totally agree. This is very interesting. I think, we had no specific agenda today. It's kind of interesting where this is weaved through. Matt, you had a huge punch list. How are we on the Matt Conweiser scoreboard?
So we've covered most of the human-controlled side of the AI things I wrote down, but almost none of the autonomous ones. So just to give everybody a tour of how my brain was working, and the highlighting didn't quite work here, so it's not all supposed to be yellow. It was shades of it. But what I was thinking about when it comes to urgent care and critical care needs, autonomous agents can interact with people about healthcare and insurance topics. They can provide emergency information. So if the state intercepts critical information about a natural disaster or other things, they can push it through. AI can disseminate that, whether it's robocalls or a chat interface. Where it gets scarier is the idea of having an AI agent autonomously handling 911 calls, right? But if we look at autonomous vehicles, we can send an autonomous vehicle into a hazmat situation that maybe would be too dangerous for a human to assess or analyze the situation, to take readings, to see if there are living humans somewhere in that situation. So less risky. But what about the idea of a self-driving ambulance? We have self-driving cars. What if you have everybody's trained as an EMT or a paramedic and they need extra help on the patients that are in the back? You can set the ambulance to self-drive, and then you've got an extra set of hands to now help the patients instead of having to staff more people in the ambulance. Just an idea. And then, of course, heavy equipment, construction vehicles, clearing areas, fire trucks, and other heavy equipment. And then finally, from a robotics autonomy perspective, the ability to retrieve humans that are in danger or at risk. And then finally, fully automaton doctors or EMTs. I'm not recommending any of these. I was just thinking about all the different ways in which AI could apply to critical care or care providing or disaster and emergency response and recovery. And this is kind of all the things I was able to come up with categorically speaking. And I'm just curious, like, what do you think about this? Like, am I way off base in the possibilities of the future? Is there something I've missed? Am I just completely overshot it? I'm looking at this more of a, I know about AI, I know about robotics, I know about governance laws and care, but I'm not an expert in this field. So I just figured I'd put all this up as topics. So what do you think?
I think this is all realistic, contributory use cases that can be managed and controlled as we evolve AI. I think some more than others, but I don't see anything on this list that is unrealistic.
I just had a thought that crossed my mind. I completely agree, Matt. This is probably, and I just took a screenshot. I hope I have your permission in retrospect, because I think those are all very, very cool topics. I think if we look at the greater scheme of things, we might even be able, just want to give one example, to also help in a financial way and relieve the completely overburdened healthcare system in total. With a very simple example. I shared with you earlier that we support Seattle Fire to determine when a call is a mid or low acuity. And the reason that we do that is because we want to help three parties involved. First and foremost, the patient. Because if you have a mid or low acuity and you call in, an ambulance won't help you and an ER won't help you, but a nurse could help you. Let's say your kid has a fever and you are not sure what to do. A nurse can help you way better than an ambulance or an ER. So we help the patients right away. Secondly, we help the people on the floor, 911, because they need a free line in order to help the real critical cases. And then, of course, the ambulances, because you don't dispatch them where they're not needed. But what is the impact if you think one step further? An empty ambulance, and in some of the rural areas, 80% of the ambulances have no shows or actually have low cases that are driven to the ER. An empty ambulance is around about $1,000 for the taxpayer or the health insurance. And then an ER investigation that says, well, you should probably go to see a nurse or GP is between $3,000 and $10,000, depending if you're in New York City or in a less populated area. If you think that 30 to 80% of the 911 calls and ambulances dispatched are basically taking that amount of money that then the insurance companies have to pay, but you could solve that, do you know what impact that has on the healthcare system of the US? Because all of a sudden you realize it's tens of billions that are wasted because currently the wrong care is provided at the wrong point. And if AI can only chop off 5% of that, 10% of that, and relieve the financial burden on the taxpayers and the healthcare system, that fundamentally changes a lot of other things, because we're looking always at the first instance. But if you go a step higher, basically those simple things can make a real difference in the grander scheme of things. And that's why I like your government so much when you put it in there. We don't have to look for the robots and saving a world, hunger and peace and whatnot. Let's look at those where AI can perform better now than humans. And I like that you bring in self-driving ambulances. If you look at the statistics, I'm pretty sure that self-driving cars cause less accidents than humans. They cause accidents, of course, but less. And if you can just make it better than it is right now, I think it's worthwhile thinking about it.
Yeah.
And if we could save that much money, we might actually be able to afford to build a next generation 911 network in the US and take advantage of all this stuff. Forget about auctioning spectrum, you know? No.
I was going to say, great list, Matt. I'm less in tune with the medical side and the law enforcement side, obviously, but applying your same list to the law enforcement side is really just an overlap there, obviously, and things like that. But also when there's concerns about officer safety, obviously drones are a thing right now. I mean, that's been a thing for quite a long time. And the miniature robots are just going to get better, and they're going to be even remote controlled. That Tesla has their new what do they call them? Megatron? I forget what it is. But the robots, I mean, RoboCop's coming in some form, some way or form, where if there's hazardous situations for the officers, I mean, dangerous situations, when they can deploy a robot to at least diffuse that situation or understand it or breach the situation, whatever it may need to happen, why not? That's obviously coming. It's a protection for the officers. The other side is even the intelligence side of the situational awareness, which, Mark, I think your company deals with as well. I mean, you have Google Glasses, you have things like that are available today, where a lot of that information can be disseminated as to, where the person is that needs help. This could be in a fire situation, medical situation, it doesn't matter, just an emergency situation, where you're displaying locations of people and, and maybe getting information that is relevant to that situation. that's not even science fiction anymore. The technology exists. Sometimes getting the data needed and available, Mark, we need your company and others to assemble that in a situation where things possible. But it's right here, and it's going to make, one of the things, obviously, being a police officer hasn't been very popular, right, the last 5 or 6 years. And I have a lot of friends that have retired because of that and are encouraging their kids not to go into law enforcement because it's a thankless job anymore. You're the hero. Now you're helping people and they're mad at you. It's like, it's tough. Just making things safer for people and assisting the public as well is important to the officers. It's important to the public on both sides. So, your list is great, is all I'm saying, for all aspects of public safety.
I think that we need to start thinking just openly and creatively. We've solved so many problems individually. There's nothing wrong with cobbling solutions together to solve bigger problems. 911 since 1968 has basically evolved with one thing: caller ID. We're now into next generation 911, where we're taking and looking at the metadata. We're looking at the artificial information, the sensor data, the environmental. That was the vision that my company had. Let's take all this data. What are we going to do with it? We need a mechanism to deliver it to public safety. We figured that out. A little kludgy at first, but now, guess what? The EZNet's there. Carriers are there. We've now got an information superhighway to throw this data down and get it to whomever we need to. We need to start thinking beyond, and this is where AI can really be contributory. We're doing too many things the hard way. I mean, when I was growing up, you weren't allowed to bring a calculator to class. Now there are classes that require you have a calculator, and a scientific calculator to boot. Why? Because once you understand the mechanics of the formula, they're not interested about doing the math. They're interested about finding the problem. And that's where we need to stop thinking about artificial intelligence and think of assistive intelligence. Give me the calculator. I got a hard math problem to do. Do we challenge our tax consultants? Because that guy uses a calculator. This guy does it in his head. Is he better? No, I'm going to argue that he's probably worse because humans are fallible. So we've got about 18 minutes left. Let's go around the horn. What you get out of this today? What are your thoughts going forward? And what are our next steps? Let's start with Matt.
I was thinking I was going to end up going last, but Mark, I'll tell you one thing really quickly. The reason why they didn't allow calculators when you were in school is because they didn't exist yet. I can make that old joke because I'm almost right there with you. I just figured I'd throw that out. Got to take my shots when they're open. So this has actually been really informative for me and educational for me. And I would just say, I think if I were to give anybody a closing thought, it would be to go back to what David had mentioned with regards to, if we regard these as just another application, then we're grossly underestimating them, and we need to understand what they are and how they work, or they could potentially end up in a situation that we don't want them to be in. And I think that is true. But I also think that there is opportunity to be had in looking at them and having them have some level of autonomy as well. And it's that balance that we have to be really, really careful about. And I think that I think this is a wide open field right now. I think that we're still trying to figure out exactly where it can go and what it can do, and how to control it and how to teach it. But I think ultimately, if we if we look at the 80% of the value and not the 20% of the risk, we can focus on creating governance to isolate the 20% and accentuate the 80%. It's never going to be risk-free. There's no such thing. There's nothing in life that's risk-free. But I think that there is the opportunity for great upside here. And we just need to, frankly, we just need to work together on it. And we, as in not just this panel, but companies, nations, the community that's building AI. It's not about monetization. It's not about profit. It's got to be about human good. And I think ultimately, if we can be respectful of the human condition when we build and design these systems and roll them out, there could be a sunny end to this. And that's, I don't know. It's kind of a weird feel good upside here at the end, but we're here talking about saving lives, right? So I figured that's where I'd go with it from an AI point of view.
Perfect. Thanks, Matt. David, closing thoughts from you.
Well, this is a fun time to be alive, to tell you the truth. We've been, all of us, as you mentioned, Matt, gone through the calculator revolution, whatever, led into the PC revolution. I mean, this is a transformative time, and it's actually fun. There are challenges, and I would say to public safety agencies, get started. Don't wait. Start trying some things, define your use cases, and really, it starts with preparing your people. The people side of this and moving an organization forward way more than the technology side. Some of the stuff we're talking about, like the call triage and stuff like that, technology side takes weeks. It doesn't take very long. It's not hard. But getting your people ready, establishing a policy for the use of AI within your organization, having a decision board governance in place so you can make decisions about what you can and can't do and where are we going. Those kind of things you can get started today, and they're going to be foundational whatever happens in technology. This is changing very quickly. And one of the things that is important, as somebody was saying, trying the new tools and doing trial periods and things, too, because we're not even sure who's going to be the leader 5 to 10 years from now. It's going to change again and again and again. But if you set some foundational things in place, like dealing with the people, getting started, again, I'm not recommending a product, but it's just saying Microsoft Copilot in place so you can do your summaries, whatever it may be. There's all these tools that we all have available today. It gets people ready to find the use cases. It's not going to be perfect. Get out there and test it, make it happen. But then manage that change within your organization. And then as things change, you're going to be able to adapt very quickly at that point. Now, one of the big you also do is public, and I'm going to say this is probably, to me, the second most problematic thing within public safety is our data. We have to somehow work through our data, understand what it is, and without getting too technical, classify our data, because there's personal information that we don't want to get out there. There's company information, proprietary things, but dealing with those questions around your data and making that, as much as you can, available for use to AI will be critical, because you may want to be training your own models, as Florian was talking about, have your own models and what your answers need to be. So where is that data? It's no longer just databases, right? These are documents. These are videos, these are audio calls, to 911 call centers, things like that. How do you make that available to train the AI on? Well, you've got to work through that and start making those decisions and finding the tools to help you with that. All of those are foundational. So when the AI changes and the data is available, you've built a firm foundation. I have the governments, I have the data available, and I'm able to now say, hey, here's the new tool 2 years from now that I didn't know existed. Can I try that? And maybe it makes a difference. So work with your people, work with your data. My advice.
Great. Ms. Beyer, I can't believe I got you on the webinar and not once did you mention your key word. It depends.
Well, I
If
worked
you need
hard.
to get it out of your system, guys, this is your
No,
I'll give you this gimme.
I'm okay. I think, to build on what the others have said, and again, in my role as Group EOR, I think you have to understand the mechanics of the processes that you're employing. You need to understand how they work and where the data comes from. Because if you don't know that, it's just hard to know how valuable it is. And I totally respect the fact that 80% of the time things are good. And again, I know we've picked that number out of the air. But the fact is, we all, just in the same way that if you're running a contact center that's not an emergency, that doesn't have emergency consequences, you still need to know how to get out of the system, how to get the help that you need if the normal routes don't work. It's just a consideration that needs to be included. And the magic legal word of art, and Florian, back me up here if I'm wrong, but is reasonable. What is reasonable? And I would say it is not reasonable to make no plans for those who can't rely on the technology-based system. What is reasonable? And if you can answer that question and substantiate it, have at it. Jump in with both feet. But remember that not everyone can take advantage for a number of reasons.
Excellent. Thank you very much for joining us. I know I literally drug you in at the last minute, and I really appreciate everything you've done. Florian, you get the honor of wrapping it up today. Amazing research that Cordy's done over the years, and I'm really glad to see this topic finally coming to fruition, because, as Matt stated, there is tremendous good that can be brought about here, and we're just scratching the surface. And as scary as the Terminator model is, there's that and more on the good Terminator. Call it what you want. That's available. So, what are your closing thoughts here?
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been so much fun, and I can't believe the time's already over. It feels like we just talked for 50 minutes or so. I see it very simple. We have an aging, growing population, which is wonderful. Due to nutrition and medical care and support, we're all getting older than ever before in the history of mankind or womankind, humanity. But we have less and less people supporting us when we're getting older, for us, for our kids, for the generations to come. So the only way to be able to provide relevant medical support and to make sure that everybody's been looked after, or as many as possible who have that access, we need to find new tools who can help and support that. And AI certainly can do that. It can't do magic. It can't solve all problems. But if with, like you say, Matt, and I want to quote you there again, with the right governance, put into action, looking at the things where it really can excel and support humans right now, it can almost do magic. I mean, giving medical professionals 40 to 50% additional time that they can look after patients, having somebody who is relatively new in the medical profession, who just got out of med school or nurse school, having some extra set of ears and eyes helping them, seeing if they do right, gives them confidence and they can help more people. I think, although it's a relatively new technology, if handled in the right governance, carefully, and set on the right tasks to support humans and not to replace humans, actually is here to help already. So I share your smile, Matt, and it's such a pleasure to be on that panel with all of you, that we're onto something really helpful here that might not save always a life, but make it easier for the medical professional and the patient on the other side to get better and faster treatment. But we will only achieve that if we work together, leave the monetary aspect out for a while. It will come later if we're successful anyhow. But see that we identify the root cause of the problem and apply a solution that works right now in that protected way. So I'm super happy to be in that industry. I'm super happy that we have exchanges like that. And I want to thank you all and everybody who listened in, because I think it's meaningful. Let's just continue.
Absolutely. And what I find fascinating here, nobody on this webinar today had anything to sell, right? We all work for companies. They're all there for profit. But nobody here was pushing anything for sale. Everybody here just was here because it's the right thing to do. And that's great benefit. I'm honored to be able to assemble this group of people, old friends, new friends, leaned on old friends to get new friends. Fantastic. Matt, I know you don't represent IBM, but thank you to IBM for employing you and keeping you in this industry. Martha Beyer, you're a fantastic legal representative to the enterprise community, a good friend. You helped me with Carey's Law. You're really the one behind the scenes that got that across the line and started. Thank you. I can't thank you enough for that. David, when I reached out to Darren for help, and because he was traveling, even texted me from 30,000 feet. But John Chiaramonte is the guy who got you here on a moment's notice. So thank you to Mission Critical Partners. And Florian, just can't thank you enough for bringing Cordy to the forefront here. And I'm so happy to see something that I saw 10 years ago work through this model and bring forward what you guys have. I mean, you are an incredible innovator. And thanks to 911 Inform, my company, Ivo Allen is a man with vision who took what I believed in and implemented it and really got a solution forward for the enterprise and supports me for all this crazy stuff that I like to do. And thank you to the audience who showed up today. Great interaction on the chat. For a last-minute webinar, this was more successful than I ever dreamed. So thank you to each and every one of you. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. For the next one, we'll see what happens. But I'm sure we've got new friends all the way around in this group. Thank you, one and all. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone. It's been a pleasure, Mark. Appreciate it.
Bye, all.
Bye.